time, the U.S. ambassador to Canada reportedly lashed out in a big way at Ontario's trade representative at an event in Ottawa Monday.
Canada, Pete Hoekstra reportedly lashed out on Ontario's trade representative at an event in Ottawa earlier this week.
Yeah, sources telling CTV News there was a, quote, unpleasant exchange between Hoekstra and Trade Representative David Patterson. This happened on Monday. They tell us that the ambassador hurled insults and swore over Ontario's anti-tariff ad that ran in American markets during World Series games and others.
Tensions between allies rarely erupt in public view, but when they do, they can redefine the entire relationship. In Ottawa, what was meant to be a formal diplomatic event turned into a spectacle of anger that stunned both sides of the border. An American ambassador, known for his loyalty to Trump's hardline politics, reportedly lost control in front of stunned officials. Within minutes, the illusion of steady U.S.-Canada relations was shattered. But beneath the shouting and outrage lay something deeper, the beginning of a quiet shift in power across North America. At a high-profile gathering, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra confronted Ontario's trade representative, David Patterson, over an anti-tariff campaign criticizing Trump's trade policies. What started as a tense exchange spiraled into profanity and personal attacks. Witnesses described Hoekstra's behavior as shocking, not just because of his words, but because such conduct was unheard of from a senior U.S. diplomat on Canadian soil. This wasn't diplomacy. It was a breakdown of it. For Canada, the incident wasn't simply undignified. It was insulting. Hoekstra's rage was aimed at one man, but it symbolized something far greater. A deliberate tone of hostility flowing directly from Washington. Under Trump, diplomacy had taken a new shape, one built on confrontation instead of cooperation. The message was clear. Friendship was conditional, and respect depended on obedience. Just days earlier, President Trump had abruptly ended trade talks with Canada and imposed a 10% tariff on Canadian exports. Ottawa's response was sharp but measured, an information campaign calling out the unfair treatment of a trusted ally. That campaign hit a nerve. Hoekstra's outburst wasn't spontaneous. It reflected a political culture that rewarded aggression and viewed restraint as weakness. He didn't lose control. He performed exactly as expected. Under Trump, ambassadors were no longer bridge builders. They were enforcers, mirroring the president's tone abroad, proving loyalty through confrontation. Insults and intimidation became instruments of policy. The art of negotiation was replaced by a performance of dominance. So when Hoekstra erupted in Ottawa, those familiar with Trump's methods weren't surprised. Political observers quickly recognized the pattern. Trump didn't appoint diplomats to mend divisions. He appointed them to echo his worldview. Those who scolded and provoked America's allies were often celebrated as loyal soldiers of his cause. But this time, the backlash was immediate. The insult toward Patterson, and, by extension, Canada, triggered outrage on both sides of the border. Even in Washington, lawmakers began questioning whether this brand of diplomacy was damaging America's credibility abroad. Each outburst was feeding instability, pushing once steady partners to seek reliability elsewhere. That's where Canada began to pivot. Prime Minister Mark Carney saw opportunity in the chaos. A chance to redefine Canada's place in the world. Rather than trading insults, he shifted strategy. Through global outreach, he began positioning Canada as a dependable partner for nations frustrated with Washington's unpredictability. In the weeks that followed, Carney embarked on a series of diplomatic missions from Asia to Europe. In Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, he spoke of mutual growth without coercion. In Brussels and Berlin, he met with leaders eager for stable partnerships. Canada started presenting itself as a bridge, a nation guided by principles, not power games, and the world was listening. While Hoekstra's temper fractured goodwill, Carney's calm precision repaired it elsewhere. Each meeting sent a quiet message. Canada could be the reliable partner others were missing. In capitals from Tokyo to Copenhagen, Ottawa was being welcomed as a stabilizing counterbalance to Washington's volatility. Hoekstra's tirade may have damaged relations in Ottawa, but it accelerated Canada's rise as a global alternative to the American approach. For Washington, that was a troubling development. Every time an American envoy attacked an ally, it drove that ally closer to Ottawa and Brussels. trade experts warned that U.S. companies dependent on cross-border markets would eventually feel the strain. Isolation, once unimaginable for the world's largest economy, was becoming a risk of its own making. Inside Washington, congressional leaders grew uneasy. Diplomatic outbursts were no longer seen as embarrassments, they were becoming liabilities. Canada's growing independence wasn't born overnight, but this incident crystallized a long-building shift. Ottawa no longer saw itself as the junior partner in North America. It saw itself as an equal, capable of setting its own course. When Hoekstra hurled insults, Carney didn't respond with anger. He responded with action, expanding trade missions, deepening defense ties with Europe, and strengthening partnerships with Asian economies. Every step reinforced Canada's identity as a resilient, principled, and globally connected nation. This wasn't about turning away from the United States. It was about outgrowing dependence on it. As Trump's foreign policy grew more erratic, Canada's steadiness became its greatest strength. World leaders began to view Ottawa not as Washington's echo, but as a voice of balance. Even American analysts started acknowledging the irony. Each act of aggression meant to project dominance was instead diminishing Washington's stature and elevating Canada's. The louder the White House grew, the more credibility Ottawa gained. Analysts began calling it a reversal of influence. While Trump's team sought control, it was Canada that was quietly earning leadership through respect. Behind the scenes, Canadian negotiators were expanding trade with Europe and revitalizing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. New investment deals opened doors in regions once dominated by American influence. Each success signaled something profound. The era of Canada relying on Washington's approval was fading. The Ottawa confrontation, at first glance, looked like a single diplomatic blunder. In hindsight, it revealed the limits of intimidation as foreign policy. For decades, U.S.-Canada relations had been rooted in mutual respect. Under Trump, respect had been replaced with demand, and that broke the foundation that held the alliance together. Carney's strategy rebuilt that foundation beside Washington, not beneath it, aligning with partners who valued fairness and consistency over fear. In Ottawa, political circles quietly began referring to this as the Carney Doctrine. It reflected Canada's growing agency in global affairs, writing its own script instead of waiting for Washington's cue. Soon, the tone of global diplomacy shifted. Foreign leaders who once asked how to fix relations with the U.S. were now asking how to strengthen ties with Canada. For the first time in modern history, Ottawa, not Washington, was setting the example of steady leadership. Hoekstra's tirade came to symbolize more than an insult. It revealed a deeper frustration, the sound of a superpower sensing its control slip away. As Carney expanded outreach and deepened alliances, America's old leverage over its northern neighbor weakened. Every insult, every tariff, every confrontation chipped away at the United States' image as a trustworthy partner, while strengthening Canada's. By positioning Canada as the calm amid chaos, Carney offered the world a choice: stability over spectacle. Trade data soon told the story. Canadian exports to Europe and Asia were rising, foreign investment was growing, and confidence in Ottawa's leadership was strengthening. What began as damage control had become a defining transformation. The world was changing, and Canada was no longer following the old order. It was quietly shaping the new one.